HOA, calls the cops on me, but I prove I own the property. I never thought I'd have to prove I owned my own property, but here we are. This whole mess started about 6 months ago when I bought my dream home, a beautiful old farmhouse on 5 acres just outside the city limits. The property had been in the same family for generations until the elderly owner passed away and his kids decided to sell. The location was perfect, close enough to town for convenience, but far enough out to have some peace and quiet. The land was mostly wooded with a cleared area around the house and a small barn that I planned to fix up as a workshop. Best of all, there were no neighbors right on top of me. Well, almost no neighbors. About a quarter-mile down the road was one of those cookie-cutter housing developments with identical beige houses packed together like sardines. I didn't think much about them at first. Live and let live, right? The trouble started when I began clearing some brush and fallen trees near my property line. I was out there one Saturday morning with my chainsaw when this woman in designer yoga wear came marching up my driveway like she owned the place. "Excuse me," she called out in that tone that immediately tells you someone's about to be difficult. "What do you think you're doing?" I shut off the chainsaw and pushed up my safety goggles. "Just cleaning up some dead trees. Can I help you?" She put her hands on her hips and glared at me. "I'm the president of the Whispering Pines Homeowners Association. You can't do any landscaping work without approval from the board first." I actually laughed, thinking she must be joking. "Ma'am, this isn't part of your development. This is my private property." "All properties in this area fall under our jurisdiction," she said with total conviction. "You'll need to fill out the proper forms and wait for board approval before proceeding with any exterior modifications." "Look," I said, trying to stay patient, "I appreciate you coming by, but this land isn't part of your HOA. I have the deed and property survey to prove it." She pulled out her phone and started typing furiously. "I'm documenting this violation. You'll be receiving a formal notice and fine. We take these infractions very seriously." "You can't fine me. I'm not in your HOA," I repeated. "Please leave my property." She ignored me completely and kept taking pictures. I shrugged and started up the chainsaw again. She stormed off in a huff. True to her word, a few days later I got an official-looking letter in my mailbox claiming I owed the HOA $500 for unauthorized landscaping modifications, plus another $250 for failure to submit proper documentation. I wrote, "Return to sender." Not HOA property, across it in big red letters, and stuck it back in the mail. That's when things started getting weird. Every few days I'd spot people in matching polos with HOA inspection team embroidered on them walking around my property with clipboards. They'd peer in my windows and take pictures of everything. I put up no trespassing signs, but they completely ignored them. I called the police non-emergency line to report the trespassing. They said they'd send someone out to talk to the HOA board, but nothing seemed to change. The inspections continued, and the violation letters kept coming, now with increasingly larger fines attached. I tried reasoning with them one last time. I went to their monthly board meeting with copies of my deed, property survey, and tax records clearly showing my land was outside their development's boundaries. The HOA president, who I'd learned was named Karen, because of course she was, wouldn't even look at my documentation. "The board has already ruled on this matter," she said dismissively. "Your property falls within our oversight area. You now owe $2,750 in fines and penalties. If you don't pay within 30 days, we'll place a lien on your property." "You can't place a lien on property you have no authority over," I argued. "This is harassment and I've documented all of it." "Perhaps we should let the police sort this out," Karen said with a smirk. "I'm sure they'd be very interested in someone squatting on land that clearly falls under our jurisdiction." I threw up my hands and left. These people were delusional. But Karen wasn't bluffing about calling the cops. The very next morning, I was drinking my coffee and reading the news when I heard sirens coming up my driveway. 3 police cars with lights flashing pulled up, and officers jumped out with hands on their weapons. "Come out with your hands where we can see them," one officer shouted through a bullhorn. I walked onto my front porch, coffee mug still in hand. "What seems to be the problem, officers?" "We received a report of someone illegally occupying this property," the lead officer said. "The HOA president claims you're squatting here and have been harassing their inspection teams." I had to laugh. "Officers, I own this property. I have all the documentation inside. Would you like to see it?" They followed me in, and I showed them my closing paperwork, deed, survey maps, and property tax records. I also showed them my security camera footage of the HOA inspection teams trespassing repeatedly despite the posted signs. The lead officer reviewed everything and radioed dispatch. "Can you run a property records check for this address?" After getting confirmation that I was indeed the legal owner, he apologized profusely. "Looks like we got some bad information," he said. "This is clearly your property and not part of the HOA's jurisdiction. Would you like to press trespassing charges against them?" "Not yet," I replied, "but I would like it documented that they filed a false police report. I have a feeling this isn't over." I was right. That afternoon, Karen showed up at my door with 2 other board members in tow. "How dare you try to intimidate us by manipulating the police?" she shrieked. "We're calling an emergency board meeting tonight to discuss your blatant disregard for our authority. If you don't start cooperating, we'll be forced to take more serious action." I just stared at her. "Karen, let me be very clear. This property is not part of your HOA. The police have confirmed this. If you or your inspection team set foot on my land again, I will press charges for criminal trespassing. Have a nice day." I shut the door in her face. Through the window, I could see her face turn an alarming shade of purple as she screamed about consequences and showing me who's boss. True to form, the next day, a work crew showed up with violation enforcement magnetic signs on their trucks. They started putting up yellow code violation tape around my trees and slapping bright orange unauthorized structure stickers on my barn. I called the police again. This time they sent out the same lead officer from before. He took one look at the situation and immediately ordered the work crew off my property. "Ma'am," he said to Karen, who had mysteriously appeared to supervise, "this needs to stop. You're harassing this property owner and trespassing on private land. This is your final warning before we start making arrests." Karen actually stomped her foot like a toddler. "This is outrageous. We have jurisdiction here. I demand to speak to your supervisor." The officer pulled out his handcuffs. "Would you like to continue this conversation down at the station?" She stormed off again, but not before yelling that I hadn't heard the last of this. I'd finally had enough. I called my lawyer and explained the whole situation. He was incredulous. "This is one of the most egregious cases of HOA overreach I've ever heard," he said. "They have absolutely zero authority over your property. Let's shut this down once and for all." He filed for an emergency injunction against the HOA and its board members, along with a hefty lawsuit for harassment, filing false police reports, and defamation. We had dozens of documented instances of them trespassing, making false claims, and trying to assert non-existent authority over my property. The judge took one look at our evidence and immediately granted the injunction. The HOA and its representatives were legally barred from entering my property or sending me any more violation notices. If they did, they'd face steep fines and possible jail time. But the real fun came during the lawsuit proceedings. In discovery, we found out Karen and the board had been pulling this same stunt with other properties bordering their development. They'd been trying to basically annex adjacent land by claiming oversight authority and intimidating owners into paying their fines. When this all came to light, several other property owners joined my lawsuit. The HOA's insurance company took one look at the mounting legal disaster and immediately tried to settle. They offered me $50,000 to drop the case. I refused. This wasn't about money. It was about stopping these entitled people from harassing their neighbors. We took it to trial. The testimony was amazing. Karen tried to argue that, as HOA president, she had implied authority over any property that could impact the aesthetic value of her development. The judge was not impressed. "Ma'am," he said, "you have exactly zero authority over any property outside your development's legally recorded boundaries. Your actions in this case have been nothing short of criminal harassment." In the end, the judge ruled entirely in our favor. The HOA had to pay $175,000 in damages to me and the other property owners, plus all our legal fees. Karen and 3 other board members were found personally liable since they had acted outside their authority. The HOA's insurance dropped them after that, and they had to impose a massive special assessment on all their members to pay the judgment. This did not make Karen popular with her neighbors. Would you like me to continue with what happened next? The aftermath was even more satisfying than the court victory. The massive special assessment the HOA had to levy on its members, nearly $5,000 per household, caused an absolute uprising in the community. They called an emergency meeting to discuss the situation, and this time I attended just to watch the fireworks. The room was packed with angry homeowners demanding answers. Karen tried to defend her actions, claiming she was just protecting property values, but her neighbors weren't buying it. "You mean you were harassing innocent people and got us stuck with the bill?" one elderly gentleman shouted. "I'm on a fixed income. Where am I supposed to get $5,000? Another resident stood up waving the special assessment notice. "I looked up the property records myself. Those homes were never part of our HOA. What gave you the right to try and force them to join?" Karen's face was getting redder by the second. "If you all had just supported the board's efforts to expand our jurisdiction." "Expand our jurisdiction?" someone interrupted. "You mean illegally take over other people's property? We could all go to jail over this." The meeting devolved into chaos after that. By the end of the night, the entire board had been voted out and a completely new leadership team was elected. The new board president, a retired judge, immediately called me to apologize for the HOA's behavior. "This never should have happened," he said. "We're implementing new policies to make sure it never happens again. The board's authority stops at our development's legal boundaries, period." They also voted to pursue legal action against Karen and the other former board members to recover the money the HOA had to pay out. Turns out they had violated their own bylaws by acting without proper authority, making them personally liable for any damages. Karen didn't take this well. The day after the meeting, she was out in her front yard screaming at anyone who walked past about traders and property values being destroyed. When nobody paid attention to her, she decided to take one last shot at me. Around midnight, my security cameras caught her trying to sneak onto my property with a can of spray paint. I guess she planned to vandalize my house or barn as revenge. Unfortunately for her, I'd installed new motion-activated lights and an alarm system after all the previous incidents. The lights clicked on, catching her like a deer in headlights. The alarm started blaring, and I called the police. They caught her red-handed with the spray paint still in her hand. "But I'm the HOA president," she kept shouting as they put her in handcuffs. "I have authority here." "Ma'am, you're the former HOA president," the officer corrected her, "and you're under arrest for attempted vandalism and criminal trespassing." She ended up getting charged with criminal mischief, trespassing, and violation of the court order barring her from my property. The judge wasn't amused by her excuses about protecting the neighborhood. "You were specifically ordered to stay away from this property," he said during sentencing. "Instead, you chose to attempt vandalism in the middle of the night. This shows a complete disregard for the law and your neighbor's rights." She got 30 days in jail plus a year of probation. The cherry on top? The new HOA board filed their lawsuit against her the same week, demanding she personally repay the $175,000 judgment, plus their legal fees. Last I heard, she had to sell her house to pay all the legal judgments and fines. She moved to a condo in Florida where, ironically, she's now complaining about her new HOA being too controlling. The new HOA leadership has been great. They even changed their bylaws to require a 90% homeowner vote before the board can take any legal action against non-members. They also installed clear boundary markers showing exactly where their jurisdiction ends. My property values haven't suffered one bit from being outside their control. In fact, several of their residents have told me they enjoy looking out their windows and seeing my natural woodland instead of another cookie-cutter house. I still get Christmas cards from some of the neighbors who joined my lawsuit. We have a shared bond now, the time we stood up to HOA, overreach, and won. My lawyer even uses our case as an example when teaching other attorneys about HOA law. The barn I was originally trying to fix up when this all started? It's now a beautiful workshop where I spend my weekends woodworking. Sometimes I look out at the peaceful woods around my property and think about how close I came to losing it all to an out-of-control HOA board. But mostly I think about the look on Karen's face when the judge ruled against her. That memory still makes me smile every time. Edit: Wow, this blew up. Thanks for all the supportive comments. To answer some common questions. 1. Yes, Karen really did try to spray paint my house after losing her position. The security footage is amazing. 2. The other property owners who joined my lawsuit all got similar settlements. 3. Several people have asked about the legal fees. Yes, the HOA had to pay those too, which added another $50,000 to their bill. For those wondering why I didn't settle, it was never about the money. It was about stopping them from harassing other neighbors. Update 6 months later. A lot has happened since my original post. Several people asked for an update, so here goes. The new HOA board has been amazing. They actually invited me to speak at their annual meeting about property rights and how to be good neighbors. I shared my story and helped them revise their guidelines to prevent future overreach. The legal fallout is still ongoing. 2 other HOAs in the area disbanded their inspection teams after hearing about our case. Apparently, this kind of jurisdiction creep was more common than anyone realized. Karen's life has completely imploded. After getting out of jail, she tried to sue me for emotional distress, but the judge threw it out and ordered her to pay my legal fees again. She's now living in a rental apartment and still tells anyone who'll listen that she was just doing her job. The best part? The county property assessor's office did a review of all HOA boundaries in the area after our case. They found dozens of instances where HOAs were trying to claim authority over non-member properties. New regulations were passed, requiring HOAs to register their exact boundaries and prohibiting them from trying to enforce rules outside those limits. My lawyer says our case is now being cited in other HOA disputes across the state. He calls it the Karen precedent. HOAs can't just declare authority over whatever property they want. I've actually become good friends with several of my neighbors in the development. We have cookouts in my yard sometimes, and they love that their kids can play in the woods. One of them told me their property values have gone up since the HOA stopped trying to control everything. So I guess there's a happy ending for everyone. Except Karen, but she did that to herself. Final edit. This is probably my last update on this situation. Everything has settled down now that Karen moved away. The new HOA is running smoothly and respecting boundaries, both literal and figurative. I'm just enjoying my peaceful property and workshop. Sometimes the best revenge is simply living well and watching karma do its work. Thanks for all the support, Reddit. Remember, stand up for your rights and document everything. You never know when you'll need that evidence. The next one is titled, "The Day 2 School Moms Offended the Teachers, and I Not Offended Their Knowledge." So, my kid started elementary school this week. It's a huge milestone, and I'm immensely proud of him. Another thing to add is that he's autistic and ADHD. This and the next week are what the city's education department calls Welcome Week. Kids with special needs leaves the school earlier, about end of the morning. This is important here because the children can adapt to the new environment after 3 years of kindergarten. So, on the first day of school, there I went to pick up my boy and waited. About 20 minutes later, 2 other moms tagged along and already started with the complaints. Why they called? Why the teachers can't just calm down their kids? Teachers are just a bunch of tramps who release children early just to go home early themselves. Two very important things. First, slander or assaulting a public official worker is a crime here where I live. The person who does this can face jail time and pay a heavy fine. And we're talking about a public school. Second, I have lived with teachers since I was born. One dear uncle and one amazing cousin are teachers, and one very cherished cousin, who sadly passed away, was on the path of teaching as well, in addition to being married to one. So this is very personal for me. So I said to them, teachers don't do this. Never did. It's dumb doing something like that because they would go home and continuing working, but using their resources, not the schools. They insisted teachers does this and ordered me to go home because they would go home as well, and teachers have to do what they are paid for, because they are lazy and tramp. I said exactly what I explained above. I lived with Tekahers my whole life. I'm married to one, father of my child. I'm 39 years old and never saw nothing like what they're spewing. Important, one of them already insulted a teacher last year, her kids studying at the same preschool as mine. She screamed offenses at the end of school hours. They raised their voices at me. I raised my voice as well. I don't have any obligation to be polite to who is rude to me to my people. Teachers are my people. I'm not saying all teachers are perfect, but 99% here are absolute heroes and saints. They deserve way more money at the end of every month. They left saying I have to chill out, and they don't give a effing duck if I have teachers in my family. I said I didn't have to chill out because I wasn't the one who verbally assaulted a teacher last year in front of little children. The school principal wanted to talk to me about how the school can proceed with the care of my child, because of his conditions and high abilities. I entered the reunion, talked about my son's health and educational historic, and reported what happened at the patio's gate with those two moms. Yes, with quotes, because if they behave this way and can't imagine what kind of manners they give their children at home with or without their partners. I may or may not had suggested the principal to put a printed statement at the school's door and patio with the city's education department welcome week guidelines about the release hour of every class and every special needs child. The principal may or may not accepted my suggestion and may or may not have put up the poster with the statement the next day. The two moms may or may not have became quietly furious looking at the printed words with no name tagged, but they knew it was for them. And I may or may not became really smiley when said love you sweetie, see you soon, to my beautiful, smart and loving kid when he entered his brand new school class.